Welcome to the Stat AI podcast.
Welcome to the future of emergency medicine, a realm where artificial intelligence isn't just a buzzword, but a beacon of hope and a tool for transformation. I'm DJ Apakama. My co-host Ethan Abbott and I are both emergency physicians, and we have witnessed firsthand the burgeoning role of AI in our field. Our everyday experience grappling with healthcare disparities and social challenges have led us to a pivotal question. In the wave of AI applications, what changes are coming to emergency medicine, and will they be for the better? This podcast was born not just to ask these critical questions, but to seek out answers from the experts, to understand and to demystify the potential of AI in emergency medicine. We believe in bringing this conversation to the wider community to embrace AI as a tool for positive change. This podcast is our exploration of that future, a journey we invite you to join. So let's embark on this path together to learn, to question, and to envision a new era of emergency medicine enhanced by the power of AI.
On this episode of the Stat AI podcast,
innovation is a tool that can empower you to do whatever you want in emergency medicine. Academia, community, global health is a tool. This generation, they're more tech literate than ever, and there's more technology available than ever. Even if you don't go into a startup, which I presume the overwhelming minority will, somebody will ask you to partner on a product.
welcome back to Stat AI, where we explore the rapidly evolving intersection of artificial intelligence and emergency medicine. My name is Ethan Abbott.
And I'm Dr. DJ Apakama. It's great to be here with you today, Ethan. Every week it seems like there's a new AI model, a new application, and a new promise of how technology will revolutionize healthcare.
It's a truly exhilarating time. The pace of innovation right now seems to be relentless. The AI drafting notes, AI that can interpret images, and increasingly powerful foundational large language models that can engage in complex reasoning, assist with diagnostics, and even communicate with our patients. The potential to augment our capabilities and improve care overall feels immense and overwhelming.
Yeah, absolutely. The narrative is about breaking down barriers, making these advanced tools more accessible, more affordable, and easier to integrate. But today, we're going to look at a situation that asks a critical question. What happens when adoption moves at lightning speed, potentially outpacing our ability to ensure these tools are safe, effective, and truly beneficial for all patients? What if the drive to innovate leads us to a too fast, too soon scenario?
I think that's the central theme of a compelling perspective piece that we recently found, which was published in JAMA, entitled DeepSeek's Low-Cost Adoption Across China's Hospital Systems. Too fast, too soon? It focuses on a new generation of LLMs, DeepSeek V3 and DeepSeek R1, which were developed by a subsidiary of a Chinese quantitative investment company. And DJ, these aren't just any LLMs. They come with game-changing characteristics.
Yeah, and despite the article being named like a Fast and Furious movie, that is correct. They highlight that DeepSeek models have distinct advantages. They're very low cost, and crucially, they are open source, or more accurately, open weights. So they're adhering to the MIT open source license, which means that the models themselves, the weights, they're made available. So that permits free commercial use and secondary development as long as the original copyright is retained, which significantly lowers the barriers to entry for hospitals and even startups to experiment with and deploy these powerful AI systems, potentially at a near zero cost for the base model.
And the impact really has been dramatic. The article states that by March 2025, the DeepSeek application had already surpassed 110 million downloads globally. In China, its adoption has been described really as unprecedented. Search queries for DeepSeek on Baidu, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct, China's main...
I think it's Baidu.
Baidu, okay. China's main search engine reportedly surpassed those for OpenAI's ChatGPT and Google Gemini by tenfold since late January 2025, which is really impressive. This isn't just public interest, it's translating into rapid institutional adoption.
Right, and this is where it gets particularly interesting from a health IT and systems perspective. As early as March of this year, the authors report that more than 300 hospitals in China had already adopted private, local, on-site deployments of DeepSeek. They're attempting to integrate these LLMs into a wide array of real-world clinical and hospital tasks, everything from clinical diagnostics and decision support to patient education, scientific research, and even hospital management systems. Many hospitals see this private on-site deployment as a more secure way to protect data integrity and patient confidentiality compared to cloud-based LLMs, which make it seem more acceptable for integration.
So on the surface, it sounds like a massive leap forward, democratization of AI in healthcare, accelerating innovation, right? But I think the authors raise a serious flag here. This rapid, largely unregulated adoption is outpacing China's overall regulatory oversight and governance frameworks for AI in medicine. And I think it begs several critical questions. One, are these hospitals properly evaluating the clinical safety and efficacy of these DeepSeek models before rolling them out? Are there standardized ways to assess if they're actually delivering on their promised benefits across different clinical scenarios, or if they're introducing really new risks?
Right, and the risks would not be trivial. A primary concern highlighted is clinical safety, specifically the propensity of these advanced LLMs, including DeepSeek, to generate hallucinations or confabulations, outputs that are going to sound plausible, even sophisticated, but are then factually incorrect. The article notes that while there isn't a definitive causal link, empirical evidence sometimes suggests that improvements in an LLM's reasoning capabilities can, paradoxically, be accompanied by an increase in these hallucinatory instances, which I can just tell you, personally, I have seen.
And I think that's a terrifying prospect in a medical context with enormous implications. Imagine a patient receiving plausible but wrong medical advice or diagnosis, or a clinician developing an over-reliance on an AI-generated diagnostic that turns out to be flawed. I think this is a real issue. The article mentions that some Chinese physicians are already reporting patients coming in with DeepSeek generated treatment plans, insisting on them, and despite concerns about safety and lack of proper evaluation. This creates new tensions in the patient-physician relationship, which we've also started to see here in the U.S.
Yeah, and for clinicians who are more cautious, there's an increased cognitive burden. They now have to spend extra time meticulously verifying AI outputs against established clinical evidence, which kind of negates the promised efficiency gains, right? Especially in time-sensitive environments like the emergency department. The authors also point to data security concerns. While on-site deployment might seem safer, it actually shifts the cybersecurity responsibility to individual hospitals, many of which lack comprehensive infrastructure to adequately protect sensitive health data, especially when integrating complex LLMs that have extensive parameters and hardware requirements.
I think the article also paints a picture of a perfect storm in China's healthcare landscape. You have severe regional disparities in primary care in China, a large aging population with complex medical needs, and at the same time, one of the world's most digitally integrated societies with over 800 million smartphone users, which is amazing. So underserved populations have unprecedented access to AI-driven health advice, often without the necessary clinical oversight to ensure its safe application. Disclaimers that AI advice is for reference only may not be enough in these cases, and given varying levels of health literacy, this could be highly problematic.
This rapid adoption isn't happening in a vacuum. 800 million smartphone users, which I think that's, double the U.S. population by a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's amplified by social media, which kind of creates a institutional peer pressure. Headlines on platforms like Weibo proclaim doctors claim DeepSeek has the level of a top-tier hospital, pushing other institutions to adopt these technologies quickly to avoid appearing technologically behind the curve. The public endorsement, often isolated and without full context, is just fueling the fire.
So I think with this example, we have this incredible technology. It's low cost, open source, highly capable, and being adopted at breakneck speed. And then also fueled in the background by public excitement and institutional ambition. But this is all occurring in an environment without significant regulatory gaps and insufficient frameworks for safety and efficacy evaluation. The authors of this article point to systematic reviews showing that historically, many studies on LLMs have not adequately addressed ethical or patient safety implications, nor the regulatory gaps. Evaluations are often inadequate, not using real patient data, not quantifying biases, and lacking standardized metrics.
The paper argues for an urgent need to develop strategies to address these challenges, and not just in China, globally. They advocate for robust evaluation frameworks and collaborative governance involving AI developers, clinicians, other healthcare professionals, and policymakers. And they even suggest organizing healthcare AI applications into domains like clinical decision support, patient management, and research/teaching, each requiring distinct evaluation approaches. And that is actually something that I think we can all agree on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the authors really call for a structured, evidence-based approach to implementation. Things like defining clear success metrics for each AI application based on clinically relevant outcomes, not just technical prowess, implementing multi-stage verification, including rigorous pre-implementation testing and ongoing monitoring, as well as developing integrated education for both patients about AI limitations and clinicians on effective critical AI use, as well as establishing robust governance of these local deployments, including specific data security protocols for LLMs.
The situation with DeepSeek in China crystallizes the central paradox of AI in healthcare today, balancing the immense opportunity to innovate and transform care with the fundamental principle of first, do no harm. How do we harness the power of these tools responsibly?
I think that's the core question that this article explored, and we'll be further exploring that today on our episode of Stat AI. This JAMA perspective is a critical case study. It's not just about DeepSeek, and it's not really about, specifically China. I think this applies across the world. It's this global challenge of ensuring that new AI technologies, especially these increasingly accessible and powerful frontier LLMs, are deployed as trustworthy and safe tools rather than becoming sources of harm.
Join us as we unpack these lessons from the DeepSeek phenomenon, first with this article, but I'm sure there'll be more in the future. And the question is, how can we build the necessary guardrails, regulatory, ethical, technical, to ensure that this AI revolution in medicine actually benefits everyone safely?
Yeah, we'll be discussing the proposed frameworks, the specific risks highlighted, and what this all means for emergency medicine, as we are often at the front lines of technology adoption and patient safety. How do we prepare for the DeepSeeks of tomorrow in our own health systems?
Yeah, it's a vital conversation about navigating the future of AI in healthcare with our eyes wide open to both the promise and the perils. So stay with us on Stat AI. Today's guest is Dr. Fran Riley, a clinical assistant professor of emergency medicine at Stanford, and one of the rare folks who's just as comfortable in a resuscitation bay as she is writing code. Before med school, Fran worked at Microsoft, leading EMR product development. One of those projects was eventually acquired by GE Healthcare. She's since trained in emergency ultrasound at Columbia and now leads cutting-edge research at the intersection of AI, image recognition, and acute care diagnostics at Stanford. I actually met Fran years ago when we were both residents on EMRA's informatics committee. And even back then, it was clear that she was going to help redefine how tech fits into emergency medicine. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Welcome, Fran.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so we want to jump right into looking at your background. So you began as an electrical engineer building motor controllers for the first Da Vinci robot, which is amazing. Take us to the spark when you thought running a code sounds wilder than running a robot arm, and what did that sort of epiphany feel like? And also, if you want to talk about your trajectory that got you to that point, that might be helpful for listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's more of a slow and windy build instead of an epiphany. Sadly, less efficient, but happy to talk about that. I started out in electrical engineering. I loved circuits and calculus, but was definitely driven to electrical engineering based on healthcare-related goals. My grandmother was a physician. I originally went to electrical engineering to work on the bionic eye. But anyway, so did that for undergrad and then decided to pursue graduate school in computer science to round out the software engineering part of my skills. I did this at Hopkins, which is obviously a place where the healthcare system is central to the institution. On a random homework project, I worked with the PICU director to develop a clinical decision support system to take in bedside data from all the monitors that you can imagine, plus intracranial hypertension monitor, to develop an algorithm to treat pediatric traumatic brain injury. This was really important because it provided the spark for the mission, if you will. So pediatric traumatic brain injury is a surprisingly number 1 or 2, depending on history, in terms of cause of death and significant morbidity in kids. These kids are so unfortunate to have experienced this. Managing elevated intracranial hypertension is quite complex, and there's a lot of factors which are not so easy to monitor. For example, like variability, as we see variability in heart rate, you can monitor variability in intracranial hypertension. And so I kind of saw that the role technology could play in monitoring these kids who are already so unfortunate, and then incorporate the most recent evidence-based guidelines developed by international experts and kind of have that watch over them, if you will. I know that sounds a little cheesy, but that was what I observed. And I felt like this would, any improvement or optimization of their care affects these kids the rest of their lives, affects their quality of life, ability to care for themselves, hopes and dreams for economic mobility. We know that kids from lower socioeconomic classes have worse outcomes, longer length of stay, more complications. And so just really saw technology as an opportunity to do that. And so that's kind of what really drove me to pursue both the clinical and the engineering part. And so I wouldn't ever say that medicine is my second career, because the vision was always to combine them. While doing my MCATs and organic chemistry and all those glamorous things, decided that, I know there's many things you can do while doing those things, but for me, coming from an academic institution, I saw that the other piece was also to how to make these ideas into reality, and that these things need to become products to the bedside for them to really affect our patients. And so went to Microsoft and worked on effectively like an analytics-focused EMR to gain those skills. And then from there, went to med school. And for me, I really like being a product management manager. And actually, there's a lot of overlapping elements with being an EM physician. And I had done it for longer than I thought. It was supposed to be like a gap year thing, but ended up being 4.5 years. And the biggest thing for me was just kind of seeing that gap in this supposedly interdisciplinary space. Microsoft, for example, relative to every other company, effectively has infinite resources. We had 40 physicians on staff, not all full-time, but many were, and obviously an army of engineers, and yet we still had our struggles product-wise. The healthcare environment is a very highly specialized, fast-moving, deep vertical. Physicians know that piece, but don't know the engineering piece, and vice versa. So to move the needle forward, I wanted to be truly interdisciplinary space. And so, that was when my goal was to be dual trained and to be able to speak the language of both pieces.
Yeah, and thank you for taking us through that. I really think it feels sometimes like a superpower when you can be an intermediary between two teams that are struggling to understand the different aspects of the project. When did you realize that? Was that right out the gate that kind of felt like that for you? I know you said
no, to be honest with you, like product management is a skill that definitely took some time. I went to school, graduate school for electrical engineering, computer science, but the road from idea to a product that is shipped and in place is long and tortuous. Ideas take a lot to create into reality. We went through iterations, seeing where the gap was and the breakdown of communication, why the vision took so long to come together, and all the disagreements or agreements. But yeah, it took years for me to really learn product management as a discipline, coming up with a vision, figuring out how to really execute in what order, and really navigating that conception to delivery. Seeing that over and over again was what really led to this, seeing that this gap was really a rate limiting step.
Now, I must confess, and you probably don't remember this, but there was a project we worked together on when we were on the informatics committee where I got to see this firsthand. Fran took a problem, broke it down to all the elements. It was helpful in delegating the next steps forward. I don't think you actually ended up making it to that presentation, so I thank you for all your contributions. It turned out really well because that mindset is something we are aware of in medicine, but your outside experience was really helpful in that case.
Oh, thank you. And it's so interesting because I started this journey 16 years ago and had this idea that there's this gap and addressing it. Obviously, medical training takes time. Here I am. On one hand, job security, this gap still exists. On the other hand, I think this is a skill that is underestimated in this field.
I think we wanted to pivot to talk a little bit about some EMS-focused topics. One of them is the intersection of ultrasound and AI. Tell us a little bit about your lab that trains deep learning models to spot regional wall abnormalities on point-of-care ultrasound. What was the toughest hurdle with this project in terms of getting buy-in and the technical aspects of it? We'd definitely be interested to hear your perspective on that.
So, like any EM physician, we love thinking about tools that are truly changing. And I think probably some of my electrical engineering roots plays into this, but I've always loved cardiology and kind of critical care. Physiology is similar to circuits in many ways. For me, when I was thinking about an application like that was kind of where I zone in on, and obviously we all know how important it is to recognize ACS. And it's not even recognizing the STEMIs, it's the really high grade end STEMIs that would benefit from cath. And obviously this is a endeavor we partner with our cardiology colleagues. But, given my interest in ultrasound and the space, wanted to think about a dispo-changing tool. And so I developed an image recognition algorithm based on machine learning to recognize regional wall motion abnormality. It's really easy to think about social media and TikTok. I'm too old to use TikTok. But these things where you have filters and they add rabbit ears and the way they do tracking and facial image recognition. I was kind of thinking about how come that is so far advanced compared to medical imaging recognition and labeling and features and being able to track motion. Technically, it was really challenging because ultrasound by nature has so much noise. The image quality is very user-dependent and patient-dependent, right?
Yeah.
It depends on how good the physician is. It also depends on the patient's habit is and how much, COPD and how they're feeling. And so I think for me, the technical challenge was one of the biggest challenges. Recognizing that adoption will be next. Regional wall motion abnormality is a critical part of the American College of Cardiology guidelines on this, and it's well established that this is something they look at. And so for us, one of the next pieces is to validate a visualization that we have done, which really displays it more quantitatively to increase the precision instead of just eyeballing.
Yeah, that sets up kind of a perfect question, I think. I don't want you to give away too much about the study, so
Sure.
I guess I'll ask it more generally. Say you validate the step there and it works as well as you think it's going to. I think there's going to be another step of convincing emergency physicians who use eyeball echo intuition to get the feel or gestalt of things. How do you anticipate bridging that gap?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think this is something we commonly partner with our cardiology colleagues. All of us in emergency medicine know there's a patient that we see at first and what we know about them immediately. But sometimes I think cardiology, when they come downstairs, they might have a different lens. The more we can have tools that have a quantitative aspect to help us have the discussion with our cardiology colleagues about how to prioritize. For example, here's the reason that we think this is a high-grade NSTEMI or OMI. I feel like there's still kind of discussions that are what we call intervention for is slightly different than what they might find acceptable. And so I guess my point is that I'm hoping having more quantitative and objective tools will help drive that discussion. And I know all of us want to be empowered when we have these discussions with our consultants.
No, that's great. I think it sort of maybe levels the playing field a little bit and also improves technical communication between services.
Yeah, I'm hoping it'll just take some of that subjectivity. It's like dependence on how people were feeling that day and how the conversation went in high pressure environments, emotions flare. I think it takes some of that out and hopefully enables us to have a more data-driven discussion.
Yeah, I think that's great. This is a more general question about AI. If we were to fast forward to 2030, which actually doesn't seem that far away, but in AI timeline, that's probably like 2 days. How do you imagine an emergency department physician interacting with AI? Like voice prompts, AR overlays, or something we haven't imagined yet? How are we going to reconcile this technology?
Yeah, this is such a difficult question. I love it. Things are moving so quickly in AI, and the way that the efficiency is optimized, are the expansion to multimodal, the level of reasoning with these new models. It's just so hard to predict. I will say that we all have to accept that this will be a much more pervasive part of our experience. Not just how we interact with AI in the emergency room. For that aspect, we already have ambient like scribe technology, which is, becoming more widely adopted. Obviously, it can be more integrated into clinical decision support, whether it's EMR or looking at breaths and monitoring. There's so many aspects of that that's clinically. But I think the other aspect is there's going to be so much data coming from the patient side as well, right? The patient interacts with AI, and what have they tried or been guided for? What does the AI know about them that they can bring to us? The theme is that it'll be so pervasive, and we'll have to be used to interacting within our environment in the emergency department, but also receiving it from our patients and all the sources that come with that.
No, that's a great point. I guess I didn't even think of it from both the physician and patient side. You have sort of two streams coming at you. So that's a great point. I haven't really thought of it that way as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be honest, like having worked in enterprise healthcare software for some time, I do think that is one of the avenues that we have to continue to pursue. DMR is still a cornerstone of how we interact of our practice. But I think there's also a lot of opportunity in the consumer space clinically. I don't mean like Fitbit, but what can our Apple Watch tell us or other things? I think there's a lot of richness that will bring.
Agree.
I think one of the things I also wanted to talk about while you were here is the STEMX. Am I saying that correctly? STEMX?
We call it STEMEX.
Oh, it's STEMEX. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Don't
We want to make it easy for every ER doctor.
I clearly see the word STEMI here, but that's okay. All right. That stands for Stanford Emergency Medicine Innovation Symposium. It's an annual free virtual conference. You guys host it. You co-direct it last year. You guys cover topics like AI in emergency care, industry partnerships, and even had live pitch competitions. What drove the open access decision, and how has it shaped the innovation stories you attract?
Thanks for asking that. Like any conference, there's so much work involved, but I'm really proud of what we put up last year and every year. I think that innovation is still seen as really a niche piece. In 2025, among our trainees or colleagues even in the heart of Silicon Valley, when I bring in innovation, they say, I don't know how to code, or I don't have a computer science background, so I never thought about that. I never thought about doing a fellowship in that. I never thought about doing a project in that. I never thought about being involved in that. That, for me, is one of the main barriers we need to break. This is not exclusive to somebody who knows how to code. One of the things that I'm doing is introducing innovation to our residency curriculum, and we're on the third year of doing that. But one of the things I really emphasize with them is that there's so much to this process. And frankly, if you're coding, I don't know that that's the best use of your time. I am proud to say that I do code and I'm comfortable coding, but I'm not going to be comfortable to an elite person who codes every day. I really want to break down this barrier. I think that's one of the reasons we have structured STEMEX as such. Last year, we were proud to have 800 registrants covering 50 countries, all across the United States, but across the globe, both academia, industry, as well as VCs, and even government officials, to my surprise. I was like, oh, look at this person from healthcare in New Zealand. When I was going through tough times working on STEMEX planning, I would pull up the registration list and it would just make me feel better. But we really want to break down that barrier and have more people involved. I really wish that innovation is not a niche that is relegated to the few people who have higher tech literacy. It really requires a much broader involvement. This is by design.
Yeah, it was a really great conference, by the way.
Yeah.
Just
Thank
superb.
you. Yeah, and one other piece is that in terms of, obviously we want to break barriers in general, but even across EM, I think that some people feel like this is a niche piece, but innovation is a tool that can enable you across pretty much every interest across EM. So we purposely had a session that showed innovation in peds, SIM, global health, wilderness, and rural medicine. I have residents who are like, oh, I don't want to work on innovation, but here is my EMS or social EM project that I want to do. And I'm like, oh, that's great. And then we talk about things that they can do. But I also point out to them, here's, a way that you can use AI in your project. It really is a tool that I think can enable and empower all aspects of EM.
No, that's great. I think one question, DJ and I have organized our own sort of AI conference. What sort of advice do you have trying to set up your own AI conference in your department or for your health system? What challenges did you face in terms of organizing it around a central theme or content and building it to have a coherent structure so that it was accessible to people without technical knowledge?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, one thing I just want to talk about is that I know our podcast today is focused on AI and STEMEX focused on AI last year. But as we all know, innovation spans even greater than that. And there's actually a lot of low-hanging fruit that is still really important to innovation and how we practice. And so it was our focus last year. And for us, one of the things that we really wanted to do was to make sure that, there's so many AI conferences out there. There's so many AI conferences in medicine at Stanford. There are many. And so we really wanted to focus on what would be really beneficial to our audiences that we could uniquely offer. A couple of things. One is practical uses. My 4-year-old the other day, my husband asked her some question, and she said, can you send it to ChatGPT? I still hear people who've never used it. So we really want to, I think you have to use it to really be able to imagine what it can do and to use it more widely and better. We wanted to focus on how to use it for the everyman, if you will. So that's prompt engineering or, kind of like a real-time showcase of how to do things like write DC paperwork and things like that. And then the other focus were the heart of Silicon Valley. And so having that VC piece, there's a lot of efforts being started with this, but knowing what they're really thinking, what they really want to invest in. And also the other things, we're kind of 2 to 3 years out from that initial AI release. Where are we now? Beyond the bubble, beyond the hype, what are they really excited about? And so I think those are the things that we focused on. This year, we're going to focus, AI will continue to always be a focus, but also kind of talk about the acute care continuum. So pre-EMS in the hospital and the post-discharge. And AI will obviously be heavily featured in that as well.
I wonder, once the live stream ends, what tactic, whether it be Slack channel, fellowships, repos, or sharing code in between, what has worked the best for you to turn the once a year event into something that brings buzz and collaboration year round?
Yeah. I must admit that this is an area in progress. We talked about this a lot in the debrief, and I think that there's a lot that we will continue to work on. Currently, we have a YouTube channel where all our talks are available, and each of them have gotten like hundreds of views. We have activity on our social media channels because the talks are just so great. I'll be honest with you, as the person helping plan that day, I didn't watch all of them in real time, so being able to go back and watch them has been great. Moving forward for this year, we're planning, there were so many speakers that we wanted to feature, obviously had limited time. So we're going to continue a quarterly fireside chat series, which will feature some of those really exciting speakers.
It's amazing.
That's great. We want to talk a little bit about Stanford's STEP program. I'm not as familiar with this as maybe DJ is, but it's a program, and remind me what the acronym stands for.
Stanford Emergency Partnership Program. I think it's a fairly unique program. Our goal is, I think as many emergency departments are, but definitely ours, a lot of companies approach us to work with us to do research or to see where their product stands. We have a team of innovation-focused emergency medicine faculty who talk to these companies, evaluate the clinical impact, the business model, and think about if they would be a good candidate to do more research with us. Our goal is to find the tools that will help us take even better care of our patients. We look at these companies and think about ones that are particularly good candidates for a partnership. Currently, our focus is on doing clinical research, and we do this with companies, from 3-people startup to large pharma companies. And in the near future, we're going to be offering more like consulting and product validation services.
Oh, it's really cool. Are there any, obviously some of these things are proprietary. Are there any prototypes or any things that you've learned testing out some of these either devices, models, or whatever the company is selling? Are there any things that you've learned from doing this?
I think the biggest thing is, again, like having been in industry, I've advised startups and worked with them prior to med school. And I think one of the biggest thing is matching the speed of startups to academia. That's
a great topic to discuss. Yeah.
Startups have a very strong focus. They also have a runway for their funding. And academia is not known for our lightning speed. There's the whole hospital system to consider and a lot of security considerations and things like that. So for us, one of the ways that we've been doing that is to think about, and this is kind of where the product management experience comes in, what is the piece of the product that we really need to do research on? What is our priority in this particular piece? And what is the lowest weight way we can do that partnership? You might have a product that might sit in the EMR where it has more access to data, empowered by AI that the private company hosts, but that includes a lot of complication. If we're trying to figure out, does this change behavior or improve one aspect of the visit, like history taking or vitals or monitoring, what is the piece of that we can carve out and validate before the more time-costly integration, which the company might not have time to sustain themselves through?
Oh, that's really savvy. I feel like to match the speed of a startup in academics is almost impossible. I mean, we don't deal with industry that much, at least I don't in my research, but I can only imagine a startup coming in and just watching sort of like the glacier melt.
Yes.
So, they're moving like hamsters on a wheel, getting ready to go, and it's like we haven't even signed the DUA yet to come up with an agreement. I think that's a really savvy approach. I really like that idea of picking out that one little component and focusing on beta testing that component and not trying to swallow the whole thing, which is really cool. That's great insight.
Yeah. What I gotta say is you guys just seem to be doing things in a really smart way. Kudos to you.
Thank you. We should collaborate.
That's really clever.
We should partner up once again.
We should.
Yeah.
So let's move a little bit to education and the future of emergency medicine. It's going to be hard to replicate your skill set and trajectory. One of the questions I love to throw at people is, what am I supposed to do if I'm a resident right now? And I don't have any skills, but I am willing to work hard and I want to learn. How could I angle to get involved with some of the work you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this was one of the efforts I started when I landed here fairly soon, supported by our Vice Chair of Research and our Chair, which is introducing product innovation to our residency curriculum. I introduced this to them at orientation. I also do multiple lectures in the residency curriculum. We're on our third year. I've gotten great feedback that I swear I didn't pay them to give. Basically, what I tell them is some of the things we talked about. First and foremost, innovation is a tool that can empower you to do whatever you want in emergency medicine, academia, community, global health. It's a tool. This generation, they're more tech literate than ever, and there's more technology available than ever. Even if you don't go to a startup, which I presume the overwhelming minority will, somebody will ask you to partner on a product. And so I talked to them about the importance of understanding the basics of how to do product design, how to iterate your design, how to evaluate the technology. There's a lot of my CS and ECE degree that I'm not using on a daily basis, but understanding the basics of software engineering, computer architecture, enough to ask the questions and to really see beyond the hype. You know, I'm sure all of us have experienced that people are like, oh, my company, my product is this and that. And it's like, how? And what does that even look like? Each and every one of them, especially coming from a place with Stanford's reputation, will be looked upon to make decisions like that. And so, yeah, so introducing that is something that we focus here, and we're actually doing effort to create a standardized curriculum that we can share nationwide. And so we started that last year, and hopefully we'll be able to talk more about that in the future.
That's great.
I love it.
Yeah, I will say though, to answer your question more directly, is kind of like this AI piece. I think, like we talked about earlier, AI is moving so fast, it's hard to know what do we train our residents to do today, such that they'll be prepped for 2030, which, as you mentioned, is not as far off as it once was. And I think the most important things are to use it, because I think to really use it will help you imagine what you can do. What was our vision of a mobile phone before the iPhone that has GPS, that has location services? How many things were unlocked just with that one feature, you know? And so I think being able to use the model for either, whether simple things, the multimodal, you know, you can design illustrations to help your patients understand their course or the discharge summary, to better use the reasoning models. I think being able to do that at a minimum to help with your clinical evaluation, look up the latest evidence, use that as a tool for research if one is interested in that, whether that's background search or a sounding board for research studies. And then also be able to recognize bias. You know, these models will have some degree of bias, you know, depending on how they're trained. But recognizing that, initially, like a year ago, I might say to recognize hallucinations, which they should, but something may be more difficult and subtle as bias. I think not being able to see what's going on in 2030, I think these are things that we will be emphasizing to our residents in this coming academic year.
DJ joke about residents practicing amid ambient charting and drone-delivered blood and other technologies that seem far-fetched that really probably aren't. Are there certain human skills that you feel no algorithm will replace? The practice of emergency medicine is a little bit more human-centered, maybe just because of our interaction with patients is a little bit different than outpatients and in the OR. So can you think of any sort of skills that you try to emphasize that these AI models and algorithms can't really replace?
Yeah, that's a good question. When you say to an engineer, you know, what can you do that no algorithm or technology will ever replace? It just sounds like a challenge. I'm just like, wait, for every question, I'm like, wait, there is an engineering solution to it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, off the top of my head, I think a couple of things. I mean, like, first of all, people ask me, like, how do you feel about your job being taken away by AI? And I think, you know, I think this morning Bill Gates posted that he thinks doctors and teachers will be replaced in 10 years. I'll be honest. I think at least looking at where we are now, like, there's still a lot of roadblocks, like I mentioned, with like product development, you know, integration. I personally am not worried about my job in the next 10 years, especially kind of in emergency medicine where no two patients are alike. And so I think in terms of specific skills, first of all, I feel like that sick, not sick thing, obviously AI and technology can replace a lot of that, but I still feel like that gut feeling, I think it's hard to really cover 100% or high 90s percentile. You know, we all have that patient sitting in the lobby, maybe a little diaphoretic, the silent dissection. So I feel like there's still a skill to that. And then I think the second part is, I almost hate myself for saying this a little bit because I think that I might not have liked to hear this answer at some point, but I think the other part is empathy. I also trained in New York during the peak of the pandemic, experiencing the fallout, some of the consequences of the distrust of medicine and all the things related to that. And, some of the burnout that all of us feel in emergency medicine, and there's so much data to back that up. And I think, especially when people are younger and have had less experiences with the healthcare system, it can be frustrating to have patients come that maybe seem to have a subacute complaint or are not navigating the system well enough. With my old age, the more I tell myself is, while this is not a life-threatening emergency, this person is having a hard time for whatever reason. I think one of the reasons that I think EM will be late to be replaced is because there's such a fragmented system that a lot of this is helping navigate. Patients can be clinically discharged, but to where? You're clinically stable, but are they reliable enough to understand return precautions and recognize them? That empathy will help continue to address that fragmented picture, which is what a lot of patients actually come to us for.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Go ahead. No, don't want to stop
no,
you.
Go ahead.
You're on roll.
I think that when I had moments where I was so burnt out, I had patients who are like, we just want the following 3 items. To be honest, they'll say to my face, we don't really trust you or any other physician, especially after COVID. It's hard, right? The first wave in New York was so deadly, and we all took so much risk at that time. I definitely had moments where I don't ever want to hear about what more I can give away from myself. But in many ways, it's helpful to take that step back and think about that while some of these acute complaints are not the most life-threatening, we still make a difference in their day.
Yeah, and I think what you beautifully said there was we stand at a place where we're facilitating, almost acting as a guide for people to navigate a very complex healthcare system that doesn't come with any explanations or a user manual. Where else can you go, no matter what time or what the complaint is? It's to the ED. I think hopefully our residents wear that with pride. Tala makes it such that we are different from any other specialty. I think rightfully so. We shouldn't be in the business of refusing care or anything like that.
Absolutely.
I think let's make this a little bit more upbeat because we are nearing the end here. I love to ask everyone, what apps are you playing with when you're not allowed to tell me any of the big 5 LLMs? Whether or not it's clinically or in your life, what's a new app that you started to use and it's kind of helped you a little bit?
It has to be AI related, preferably.
Preferably,
I mean, ChatGPT, but that's one of the ones you said not to say. Okay, well, I'll tell you this. I started using Noom to better track my diet and wellness things I'm supposed to work on, modifying risk factors. For those who are not familiar with Noom, this is not sponsored.
No,
it was definitely not sponsored. Basically, it's an app that is supposed to be, I think, food tracking, but also has an element of a coach. And so I actually signed up for this app, I want to say a year and a half ago. You can track, the idea is that you track your food, but they also have these kind of quick lessons meant to encourage you. And then you also are assigned a person who is a coach who checks with you periodically. It didn't really work for me because I was like, a lot of this knowledge I already know, this is not super helpful. But in recommitting to health goals, I signed up again. And now they have an AI piece. I think the AI bot's called Welly or something like that. When you enter your food log, initially I was like, let me talk to the coach again about my goals and they'll be more responsive and higher fidelity advice. Actually, it was not. The AI bot is actually performing significantly better and doing a significantly better job of interacting with me. I thought that was interesting to see that change.
That's so funny. I feel like there was a paper maybe last year that said people kind of like the empathy out of GPT versus physicians for, forget the exact condition they were talking about. But as these models change, it's been interesting to watch that particular part and aspect of them get almost creepy sometimes to a point, like sycophantically willing to please. And you're like, all right, just can you be normal? And interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think I saw a headline recently. Anna Maltman commented on how the humanistic aspect, the interaction is costing OpenAI a large sum of money, but they still feel like it's worth the investment for the experience. I'm like, that is definitely true.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Fran, this has been a great conversation. I wanted to close out with one final question about where you see yourself going in the next few years. Where do you imagine your blend of engineering, emergency medicine, and innovation taking you? What sort of next steps are you thinking about? And if you're willing to share kind of where you sort of imagine yourself in the next decade?
I thought about it's something obviously I evaluate regularly to make sure my time is spent aligned to my goals. The core part of all of this is kind of my initial goal of starting this whole journey, which is to incorporate more technology in medicine. Obviously, that's high level, but what I alluded to earlier, like there's so many aspects to that, because in industry, the way we do things is you do a needs evaluation, you think about your needs and what are the highest priority or what are the highest impact items, and then you kind of go in that order. But I think for me, continually to think about that, like where are the highest impact opportunities that not just futuristic research could go, but also like, what are current off-the-shelf technologies or near off-the-shelf technologies we can use to address some of those things. For the ones that don't have those two categories, what are the partnerships that we need to build out? I was thinking about this earlier. When I first started as a product manager, one of the key things that a product manager does is basically like what's called stack rank your priority or your features. Basically, you're kind of forced to enumerate things that are important. It has to be a 1, 2, 3, 4. There's no ties, because you have a limited number of engineering resources that build those things. So you can't just be like, well, I want them all. We need to think about, like, there's a lot of aspirations that we want to have. And that is so important. At the same time, evaluate where our highest impact needs are. For those needs, there are near off-the-shelf technology or off-the-shelf technology, as well as, even better solution. But yeah, I think for me, I'll always continue to think about that, where our gap is and how can we take technology and adapt that. We often see products that aim to serve medicine, whether that's emergency or another department, but there typically is some sort of adaptation, even for off-the-shelf technology, that needs to be done. And I think that's under-recognized. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit. Like we talk about using the latest LLMs, but really, sometimes when we look at the emergency department, I think Stanford is the most modern one I've been to, compared to technology used in social media. We're not using the latest computer science principles by any means. And so I think for me, that kind of priority-driven, but starting with a low-hanging fruit, which may have the most immediate impact, as well as building that bridge for the aspirational goals.
Amazing.
That's great. What a great place to end. And thank you so much, Fran, for taking the time to join us today.
Of course.
Yeah,
Thank
great
you.
as
Absolutely.
always. And we will continue to watch what you do next, and don't be a stranger.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to episode 14 of the Stat AI podcast. If you get a chance, check us out on X and Instagram and our newly updated website, stataipodcast.com. And make sure to tune in next month for some more amazing content. Thanks so much and take care.
Please note that the views, opinions, and information expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily represent those of their employers, our sponsors, or any affiliated organizations. The content provided is for informational and educational purposes and is not intended as medical advice. We encourage you to consult with qualified healthcare professionals for any medical concerns or treatment decisions. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.